Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm so excited to be here with you. My name is Karen Beef. I am the VP of Virtual Learning Solutions here at InSync, and that's a mouthful, isn't it? I've been in the virtual environment for 23 years and have had the pleasure of working with Jennifer hand in hand for the past 17 years. What does the VP of Virtual Learning Solutions means? It is a focus on you, similar to, thinking about what we're going to talk about today with brain-based solutions and really keeping the design and the delivery active. We want to make sure that we don't leave any, client behind in terms of what virtual learning solution they may need. So I work with individual clients to make sure that we are matching your challenges with any solutions that we see you might need. So with me, and such a pleasure to always present with Jennifer, the owner and the founder of InSync Training. Jennifer?
Hi, and thanks, Karen. And Karen really does do all those things. If you get the opportunity to have a meeting with Karen, she's great at identifying the solutions to help you elevate your probably already great programs. Like Karen said, I have been hanging around at InSync Training since we founded it in 2000. And ever since then, we've always been focused on virtual learning. We are a training organization. We are not a technology organization. So our goal is to really make virtual training great. So our tagline is virtual learning, real success. And we're hoping to share some of that with you today. So InSync Training is a company that does a couple of different things. I'll give you a 20-second overview of that. We are a learning solutions provider, which means whether you need facilitation help, post-production help, instructional design help, we can provide those services, or we can enable your team to develop those skills themselves. So that's all I'm going to say about InSync Training. I hope the rest of the program speaks for itself. I'd really rather talk about what our discussion is about today. I don't think it's a surprise to think about the fact that virtual training is a top priority for all of us. But I think that, and I've been saying this for almost 25 years now, the virtual experience is just often not holding up to the standards that we expect for quality training. And we have to really get beyond the webinar that we came to expect in the first 20 years of this. These virtual classrooms need to be real classrooms where you're fully engaged and expected to learn. Today is a webinar. It's not training. And we're going to talk about the difference. We need to set our expectations higher than webinars. So these experiences need to be instructionally sound, and we don't want people to hate them. So what we're going to talk about today is moving from the old way of doing virtual learning to a science or research-based design approach to making it great. I'll start by talking about moving from this webinar to an active and sustainable learning experience. So not what we're doing today, but what you're doing every day with your audience. And we'll talk about brain-based learning principles. It's something you hear about, read about all the time, but what does it really mean? And then talk about how brain-based learning principles affects learner engagement. And we talk about learner engagement in 3 different ways: environmental engagement, intellectual engagement, and emotional engagement. Karen will get into that very eloquently later. We do want this to be a sustainable program, meaning you'll have something beyond this program that you can use. So we're going to explain 2 different activity designs that are really in-depth, that maximize learner engagement, that use these principles. And you're going to leave with a bunch of stuff. We'll give you links, or you'll get them in a follow-up email. You'll get them both ways. But a 64-page ebook, which talks about this brain-based stuff, and also has 5 different leader materials in it to explain these activities, and some other worksheets that'll help you. Where this all starts, and you can probably hear that, is in design. Let's talk about design. So since the pandemic and this rush to deliver all this virtual stuff, we started to skip the design process. We started to rely on slides and live video to engage learners. And I think that this limits the potential for like real learning to take place, because learning is not just video and it's not just slides. We let form, meaning like tech and video and slides, win over function, instructional design. What we need to do is fuse these classic design principles that we all know with the modern learning environments, which to me, there's three parts to a modern learning environment. The virtual spaces, the where people are learning. Blended content, which is what people are learning and how that content is being delivered. And the hybrid workforce, which is who is learning. And we need to learn to navigate through that. One thing the pandemic taught me is that instructional design is much more important than it ever was before.
I mean, I think, Jennifer, that is one of the things that I think all of us took away from the pandemic, right? Is that instructional design is just pivotal in our virtual learning classrooms. But so much has happened over the last 3 years. I would love, before we get into too much of what we've learned, I'd love to hear what, the individuals that are here have learned. So if you guys don't mind, go to the chat and let's just talk about what are some of the lessons you've learned for a virtual classroom since the pandemic. So over the last 3 years, everybody jumped on Zoom, learned it, right? What have we learned? What have we learned about the virtual classroom through this pandemic? Engagement is hard.
Yeah, people are talking about short sessions. The amount of 8-hour sessions we saw in 2020 was so hard. It was so hard.
James, we learned we need it. Yeah, we learned we need it. And Cindy, most topics can be taught virtually. Interesting. Because prior to the pandemic, I can tell you, Jennifer and I used to beg people, right? This stuff really works. I promise. We've been doing it for 20 some years. But yeah, now people are thinking it does. It can work. Easy to fall into slides and really lose that audience. Molly, engagement is not guaranteed. Really hard to keep those people engaged. Oh, and Matt, people are burnt out. You aren't kidding. So I don't know if you're with me or not. You can virtually raise your hand or let me see it in the reactions. But one of the things that the pandemic taught us, and I think taught a lot of organizations, because I'm seeing it come through, is that a hybrid workforce is here to stay, whether we want it to be here or not. So kind of back to the point of some of you are like, yeah, some people like it, some people don't. That's a reality. The hybrid workforce, the hybrid model of working, and then the hybrid model of virtual learning is here to stay. And we have to adapt to it. That's one of the big lessons that I think all of us are taking away, is that we jumped on, we thought we'd go back. And some organizations have gone back, but nobody's gone back fully into face-to-face. Because one of the other things that I'm seeing in the chat is that people are going to virtual first. I mentioned back in the day, Jennifer and I used to go and say, please just listen, virtual training works, I promise. And so we were trying to get them to think about how to use it. Now people are going and saying, tell me why I can't deliver this virtually first. Talk me out of it, right? So this new philosophy of virtual first is being applied to decisions at the top level. And then you've got facilitators, designers, producers, learners that are like, I don't know if I like this, but it's here and it's happening. So the next thing that I'm seeing in the chat is there's a new set of skills. It's not just about the hardware. It's not just about the software. It's about how we embrace these new skills, not just skills for virtual learning or virtual teaching, but just skills in general for working remotely, right? We need to have skills to work in this new economy and apply the learning to this new economy. It's not going away. And something somebody else mentioned is we're tired. People are tired. A lot of people, had to learn Zoom, be on video. That's why we're not requiring video. You don't have to have it to be engaged, but you do have to be engaged to make sure that learning transfer happens. But the fourth piece that we've learned is that Zoom fatigue is real, and making people be on this camera 24/7 is exhausting. So as we think about number 3, the skills needed to work remotely, to work in this virtual world, we need to take that into consideration. It's not just about the camera. It's about engaging with people. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how do we take virtual learning through the lens of the pandemic and turn it into real learning versus just knowledge pushing. Okay. So when we think about virtual learning being real learning, we need to think about something that Jennifer said earlier, and that is that virtual learning classrooms are real classrooms. They're spaces where we can make virtual training better, right? There's spaces where individuals are fully engaged. We expect them to learn. We have to change the way that we expect people to engage with us. We have to change the way that we deliver some of these activities, right? Because we do have to have higher expectations. We have to assume that Amara and Amy and Bella want to be here. We need to assume that you want to be here and that you showed up not because someone made you, but because you wanted to learn something in a different way. The demand for virtual learning experiences are instructionally sound, and we need to make sure that we're backing them up with the brain-based science that we use in good, great face-to-face environments as well. Because it's our job to provide these opportunities for learner transfer, application, practice, and true collaboration to happen in this virtual setting, right? And so we have to apply that brain-based approach that deeply engages learners in order to have active learning happening, right? Active learning, as we know it, as it's defined, right, is a method of learning in which students are actively involved in the learning process, and where there are different levels of active learning depending upon the student involvement. If we really think about that go way back to the days of my academia, active learning is something that we have pushed, we have wanted, we have desired since we were little. And so when we think about active learning, and here in NSYNC, we have something called an active sustainable virtual learning formula that helps us really focus in on how to achieve active learning so that learners want to do more. They want to do more than just passively listen. Students want to be part of these active teaching techniques. Students want to apply their knowledge, right, when given the chance to work in small groups or to role play or to work in simulations, right? We have to make sure that things are active. So when I hear active learning, I think about our formula, and I think about how we have to start with design, just as Jennifer mentioned. We start with that design, that compelling content, that brain-based engagement that we're going to talk about in order for learners to be able to have role play happen. But in order to have that content sort of come alive, right, we go back to what the pandemic taught us. We need skills, not just instructional design skills to provide that compelling content. We need facilitation skills, right, that go beyond the face-to-face, the brick and mortar building, to be able to jump through these computer screens, because the content is only as good as those of us who are being able to share that information with the learners. Jennifer, did I cut you off?
No, you said jump and just maybe jump. Listening to you gets me all excited about this all over again. It's obvious how much you really believe in what you're saying. So,
well, I really do. And I mean, because a piece of content is just a piece of content. It can be really awesome content. It can be really boring content. It's what we do and the skills that we have as facilitators to be able to turn that up a notch, to be able to connect with the learners, because it's really about the connection of the content with the learners, and then through that technology that allows for that student transfer to even happen, right? And so that the third piece of this active formula is really being able to become part of the environment, right? The environment in which people are learning is extremely unique to this virtual learning classroom. And so we have to share tech secrets. We have to, as a learning and development community, we have to share what's working in and outside of these platforms when we're working with students in order for students to remain active. And the only way that we can have active and sustainable virtual learning is to make sure that we're following the science behind it. So Jennifer, if that's what we're after, can you outline for us the difference between webinars and quality virtual training, but really focusing in on the research that we have?
Yeah, we've been doing this a long time, everyone. I mean, literally, we've been doing this. I've been doing this since 1998. Yes, there were really software packages out there. Yes, I'm really that old. I know that's a surprise to everyone. And what people thought way back in the beginning is that the technology was going to do the work for us. We've got slides, we've got people, we've got a teacher. Let's just throw those crazy kids together and mix them all up and we get trained. And the reality was that didn't work. And we had a hard time, like Karen has said several times, convincing people that virtual learning is real learning too. And that's because we were designing seminars, informational sessions, like webinars, like today. Today's a webinar. We're not trying to pretend it's training. And there's a reason that you came here. There's a reason that this type of session is important. We pay money to go to conferences and watch seminar after seminar after seminar, don't we? That's important to us because it gives us just enough information to figure out what we need to do next on our own personal learning journeys. Well, as we move to sustainable learning, we need to move from this webinar approach to a design training program. So what's the difference? First of all, a webinar is generally a one and done thing. It's a piece of information and got it, I'll move on. And training isn't. But if you're trying to figure out what you're delivering as a webinar or training, and they're both good, there's nothing wrong with either one, here's your test. If you went through if you sat through a recording of a really good program, and you got a lot out of it, maybe some of you are watching this recording now, later on, but the fact that you weren't there live didn't make a difference. If it didn't make a difference that you weren't there live participating, then it probably was a webinar. It may have been super interactive. It may have had a lot of content that captured your attention. But if you watch a recording and like, gee, I wish I could have contributed to that, or that looked like a really good exercise, or I had some ideas, or I have questions and I want to follow up more, that was probably training. And that's great. Both important. This, like I said, nothing wrong with the webinar, but we need to be clear as to the intent of the program. If it's training, I think that then you all need the opportunity to practice and apply what we're teaching you. And we need to find ways to measure that learning. There was a book that a colleague of mine wrote once that was Talking Ain't Training, and I want to follow it up with Listening Ain't Learning. I mean, it's, of course, you're getting information out of this, what to do next, but it's just a starting point. So let's take a look at the science behind this. And this is a really difficult slide. So I'm going to talk very briefly about some research stuff. It's all in that ebook that comes with this session if you want to learn more. But I want to give you just some context about where the framework for our engagement approach comes from. So many of you are probably you've heard of brain-based learning, or you've read about it, something got you interested and brought you here. Brain-based learning is about how people learn, not as much what they're learning, but how they're learning. And in this model, which was developed by a husband and wife team, they were named Kane and Kane. They really were focused on environment. The environment in which we're learning matters. So our job as learning and development professionals is to focus on as many aspects of this as we can so learners are engaged, so we enrich the environment. Because let's face it, putting slides and video up is all very nice, and we've evolved as a species that we can do this. but we need to make learning active. Training is an intervention about change. We need to understand how other people learn, and we need to put that understanding at the very center of what we're saying and what we're doing. We need to try to affect change. And when I say measurement, I don't mean, did we finish all the slides? By measurement, I mean observable changes, measurable changes. And I mean, that's a session in and of itself. So I think Karen pasted a really, really long link, which is the book by Kane and Kane, into the chat. If you're interested in the book, it's just a nice, they packaged it really well to really understand the basics behind the brain science. Okay, so that graphic was a lot. You're going to read more about it because that's what trainers do. We research, we learn. But what does that mean in the virtual classroom? What that means is we are looking for knowledge to be transferred, and we're looking for skills to be applied. So let's take a look at a couple of ways we can get that done. So how does the application of this kind of brain-based learning foster, encourage learning transfer, information from my mouth or from some materials to your brain? How does that happen in the virtual classroom? Alignment between a learner's intention and the intent of the content. Alignment between what the learner wants and what the content is trying to do. This helps us feel like the content is more relevant. That's basic adult learning stuff. For example, one of the classes that we teach, we've been teaching for years, is virtual classroom facilitation mastery. It's one of our most popular programs. And when you as an individual sign up to take that class, which you might, maybe you have, you know what you're signing up for. You've read the learning objectives, you've read the course description. I want to improve my skills as a virtual facilitator. But sometimes Jenna might manage a group of 20 facilitators and say they need to take this class. So she signs them up and 20 people go through together. And some of those facilitators are in there thinking they're going to learn how to use Zoom or MS Teams or WebEx, because that's where their pain point is. So the learner intention in that case, I need to learn Zoom, doesn't align with the intention of the content, which is to teach you how to facilitate well, no matter what virtual classroom you're in. And that could cause a lot of anxiety. It really decreases intellectual engagement, which Karen's going to explain it in a little bit. But the idea is, if we can create alignment and relevance and happen right away, then we can be much more successful, because we lose people online a lot faster. It is a lot easier to lose somebody online than face-to-face, even if the quality of the content is equal. So I need to prove that relevance and create alignment. So that's one way we can foster learning transfer. So let's talk about how we can encourage application of learning. A lot of times, especially in this hybrid world, this is a more authentic way of learning, isn't it? I often interacting with a global team that sometimes they're in a warehouse, and sometimes they're at their desk, or they're working from home, or they're on the road. And teaching in this format, teaching a skill like customer service or remote sales, teaching in this format is actually more authentic. We're teaching in the format in which the skill is going to be used. 25 years ago, I was talking about teaching Microsoft Excel. Teaching Microsoft Excel online, I submit, is more authentic than bringing you into a classroom. I'm never going to go someplace else, use a computer that's not mine, and try to create a pivot table in a spreadsheet. But teaching me to myself at my own desk, with my computer set up exactly the way I want it, with actual real work in front of me, is more authentic. And in theory, the learning can really get sticky. Like I said before, telling ain't teaching, so webinars aren't there, and listening ain't learning. It needs to be active. That was a lot. Karen, I don't know if we had any questions that come up, but we have done our own research into learner engagement. largely based on this Cane and Cane, but also on a lot of other stuff. And Karen, I'd like you to talk about what that framework looks like and how people can use it.
Absolutely. When we think about the research that Karen Kane did and the research that we've done over the last 5-7 years, we think about what Jennifer was talking about and the intent and the alignment of the intent of the learner and the alignment of the intent of the content. One of the things that hit me is when Jennifer was talking about, I'm not going to really intellectually engage, if I can use our own words, in a pivot table if I'm learning it on somebody else's computer, because I need to engage with the environment that I'm going to be working in on a regular basis. And when I'm engaged within the environment that I'm working in, I'm emotionally vested, right? So think about a call center, and we're training call center agents, and we bring them all face to face. They have no phone. They have no, they have nothing. They're just there. They're in the classroom, and we're talking through, and we're role playing, and that's awesome. But they're role playing with another physical being in front of them. And then we say to them, now go out and take your skills and put them on the phone. And day one, we freeze. And we wonder, was it the training? No. It was really the environment in which we trained them in. We took them out of the environment we expect them to teach or be present in, work in, and we said, let's learn a skill set. And they were really good at the face-to-face exchange. They didn't learn the skill set to transfer that to the new environment, which was the phone. And I know that sounds kind of odd, right? But they are unique environments. And so the application of brain science does ensure learner engagement. If we think about the brain science approach, meaning a development of measurements and techniques to ensure that the learner is engaged within the experience that they're learning in. Again, go back to the customer service agent who's supposed to be working on the phone. If we are learning in an authentic manner that we want them to transfer back on the job, we need to make sure that they're environmentally engaged in the environment that they're going to work in. So let me break that down a little bit. We believe, based on Cane and Cane and the research that we've done, that engagement is more than the role playing. It's more than the polls. It's more than watching people on video. It's more than the activities that we do in a face-to-face or a virtual environment. It's really getting into 3 different dimensions of learner engagement. I've already shared them. They're on the board. Emotional engagement, intellectual engagement, and environmental engagement. I want to start with the environmental, how the learner interacts with the learner environment. When the learner interacts with that environment and that environment changes, the learning outcome changes. Think about this. You're in a virtual environment, you're in Zoom, and the facilitator decides to take you into a Miro board. The person has never been into a Miro board, so you have to take the time to teach the person how to be in the Miro board or the activity, how awesome and compelling it might be, lost all meaning because the environment changed. Therefore, the learning outcome changed. We have to make sure that we're paying attention to the learner environment and that we're paying attention to that environment is unique to every delivery that we offer. Just because we're in Zoom today and we're in WebEx tomorrow doesn't mean it's not a different environment. We have to make sure that we're adjusting our learners and ourselves as professionals and facilitators, producers, designers to make sure that that environment is being connected to the learner intent. We can positively manage and contribute to that environment and foster strong learner engagement if we pay close attention to the change that may happen within that environment and we address it. Now, once you're in that environment, right, you want to make sure that you're connected emotionally to those learners as well. Jennifer, do you want to add something before I go into emotional engagement?
Yeah, people are really actually, we've got several comments on environmental engagement and providing examples on. Tracy said, and I'm gonna respond to them. train a new hire with only a laptop because we don't give them a second monitor till after 3 weeks to contribute to environmental engagement. Sure. I mean, we're talking about onboarding. So now I'm learning in an environment that isn't authentic because eventually I'm going to have a second monitor. And also, it's not only not authentic, it might be frustrating. Not everything fits. And I could see the teacher saying, well, in a couple of weeks, you'll have a second monitor, and then you would do this. Talk about an emotional disengagement as well, right? And environment means, for example, Karen and I both have dogs. We've locked our dogs up, right? Because them barking during a class affects the environment. Or if I'm learning and it's in a busy call center and I'm trying to learn from my desk, that affects environmental engagement. Or if I simply don't know how to use the software. We had a class that we used to teach for a client, and we had to run videos. And that was part of the class. It was designed into the class, not live videos like this, but pre-recorded videos. And they had some offices in rural Africa that didn't have the bandwidth. So they said, don't worry about them. They could watch it later. And that their environment was different. And we disregarded their environment. So we disengaged them on so many levels, Karen. But I mean, that was an example of it. So yeah, Tracy, I do think that that's the case. And Miguel, we've got a blog coming out soon on all three of these. And so we'll make sure everybody gets access to that. Mm-hmm. Oh, look at what Tracy has to say. She's trying to make the case that we failed the training before the start because the second monitor, this helps me make a case in my new way. Tracy, I'll give you my email address when Karen starts talking again, and write me. I'll send you more information.
Mm-hmm. Because what you're talking about, you're also describing, Tracy, is something that we see often in the field as well. A lot of field representatives are given a tablet, but they're trained on a laptop in their office, or they're trained in person, but then they're expected to go into the warehouse on their laptop and still conduct the same job that they were trained to do, but on a different environment, a different piece of software, a different piece of hardware. I mean, so the environmental engagement, the key around that is really how the learner interaction with the learning environment changes. And it changes both the environment and the learner's perception of that experience, which then leads into how emotionally engaged they may or may not be, right? So if I am frustrated because now I've been taught on a laptop and now I need dual screens and I don't understand that, I am now emotionally disconnected, and I haven't necessarily then connected my knowledge to my real job. And so when you start thinking about virtual learning being real learning, we have to pay attention to these three domains because, well, the first two domains, we have to pay attention to our environment. We have to pay attention to how that environment affects the emotional connection to the learner, and just overall how our techniques as facilitators connect or disconnect learners on the emotional level. Because it's extremely important to realize that the learning experience is changed not only by the environment, but how a learner feels about the experience that they're in. I think it was you, Matt, a little bit ago mentioned something about, individuals. The pandemic taught us that, just pushing PowerPoint slides and reading off a script is very boring and very recognizable. We have to make sure that we are treating these individuals that are coming to these classrooms with the respect that we would in a face-to-face classroom, and that we aren't just using it as a way to push slides, because we know that will emotionally disconnect the learners, right? And they're just going to check a box. I went to Karen's training, great. But they're not going to actually take that training, that knowledge, and then transfer it to the ultimate engagement level, which is our intellectual engagement, right? What the learner thinks about the information being presented, what the individual learner takes away from that knowledge-based training, and what they're able to actually do with it. And intellectual engagement involves more than learners feeling, more than their environment. It's really how they get mentally inspired in that training content. And it's that passion, right? And I get really excited about this because it feels like a really good movie, right? If we are intellectually engaging our learners, we are putting them at the edge of their seats in the movie theater, just waiting. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? Oh, there's going to be a sequel, right? And that's what we want our learners to be able to do, whether it's in face-to-face or virtual. We have to intellectually engage them enough to flip that switch, that the passion's burning, that they go back to the job and they're like, oh, in onboarding, I learned X, and now I can do it right here in my real job. And it's really important to apply this framework in your instructional design techniques. And then secondly, mirrors it out in your facilitation techniques, because ultimately our learners don't just have content that they're reviewing, they have content that has to come alive in the midst of a session. So I know this is a lot, I know this is heavy, but this is our connection and how we actually make that research come alive in the virtual environment, and why it's so important to us to really focus in on active virtual learning experiences, because it does truly align, and you'll see on the next slide, we are aligning in this graphic how the concepts of learner engagement and the brain-based principles just go hand in hand. Not every brain-based principle aligns with our engagement model. You're not going to emotionally engage and environmentally engage and intellectually engage in every single principle, but there are some really strong and solid connections. And, at first, when we were going through the research, and Jennifer and Charles and I were going through kind of making these brain-based connections, we tried to force fit some of them, force fit those relationships. But we soon realized that if the connections don't happen naturally, it doesn't happen at all, right? We have to make sure that those engagements are there. So take number one. I mean, if you look at number one, and I know it's small, this is actually in the ebook, but if you can see number one, it says the brain is a living system. Now that supports the concept of environmental engagement. How? Well, it's where we learn matters, as Jennifer said moments ago. It's relevant to the concept of that meta environment, right? The environment in which the individual is actually learning. Learning, like she said, on a phone, maybe while waiting for a flight, is possible, but may not lead to the best outcome, right? Because the external environment around them affects the ability for the learner to engage. So it really, the brain as a living system supports that environmental engagement. Number 12, if you kind of go down to the bottom right-hand corner, each brain is uniquely organized. That supports all three: intellectual, environmental, and emotional, because the unique nature of the brain means that the learning environment needs to be accessible, kind of that no learner left behind, right? In multiple ways, and provide all those different opportunities to react and contribute in a way that the interaction between the learner and the environment then can be enhanced, so that we have that sitting on the edge of your seat feeling, waiting to implement it. So I know all this is a ton, and Jennifer and I geek out over this, but I want to kind of take you through this framework so that we then can go through some real live activities. Now, we're going to go through two of them kind of in full. Jennifer's going to start us out and share her favorite in just a moment. But all 5 of the activities that are mentioned in the book have a full-fledged facilitator guide that you can actually take today and start using back on the job. So again, we wanted to provide you with an opportunity to not just see them, but also to be able to utilize them in action. So Jennifer, let's share some of these.
Okay.
Let's share your favorite. I know you love this one.
I do love this one. The facilitator guide is facilitator script, sample facilitator scripting, producer scripting, slides, activity instructions. So it's got much more than what you're seeing on the screen. And this particular activity has been my favorite for 15 years. A client of ours designed it. Back at the time, they were designing it for the iPod. So that showed you how old it is. And the idea, we were teaching new marketing associates how to create a marketing funnel, which is to narrow down the amount of people we want to market to and identify the best clients. Not a marketing person, so that might not have been a great explanation. But the goal is to introduce, I'm going to read a little bit off the slide, the idea of a marketing funnel. And the challenge was, how can the learners use data that they collected about an audience to create a marketing plan? We had to design a debrief, because a debrief, as Karen's going to talk about, is how we make learning sustainable. And so we're going to have different groups coming up with a marketing plan. So we know ahead of time that we want people to come up with their different marketing plans and then kind of pull each other's apart to come up with the right answer. It talks about the audience, what's the approach, small groups, breakout rooms, and what's the brain-based engagement. This was brilliant. When people got all of this unrelated content, so the engagement here is that we've got a lot of content in our head that didn't make sense before. We're going to pull it together, interact with other people, and create a narrative. So we want to intellectually engage our learners by creating their own stories. A lot of words. Let me tell you about the design, because this is what I'm excited about. The design, thank you. So this is what happens. This happened in WebEx back in the day. We're looking for patterns. That's the brain-based application we're looking for. Learners took an online survey about their experience with, at the time, it was iPods. Now we're saying AirPods, whatever it was. What was their use? Were they female, male? What was their age group? What was their, all the different demographic stuff, and their experience using an MP4 player at the time. They fill out a survey. And the producer, and I was the producer many times for this, pulled that data in the background into a macro-enabled spreadsheet that they created, and created a brand new data set. So I have 50 people from literally 12 different countries that I've never met before, and they all filled out the same survey. And while I'm doing the work in the background, the facilitator, Karen, is teaching them content. She's teaching them about the marketing model. What would you do with data if you got it? And that gives me time in the background to create a new data set that we shared with the learners. And then we break them into groups. They didn't know each other. They go to the breakout rooms with these spreadsheets, and they create their own marketing plan. And they have to use that data that nobody has ever seen before to back up their approach. And they come back and they make a presentation. And the debrief is talking about how that data can be interpreted in different ways. In 45 minutes, we used a ton of different tools, web sharing and application sharing and surveys and whiteboards and lecture. But we didn't use it just because it was a tool. We used it because it was a way to actually support the content we were trying to teach. Instead of saying, this is a funnel and this is some data and this is how you can interpret the data, they got to do it. And the lectures were intertwined in between each step of this activity that would go on for 45 minutes or an hour, with 50 people from 10 different countries, different languages and stuff. And it was the most fantastic activity. And it really, really drove the learning home, so much more than lecture. And it really let people say, okay, I'm going to bring the demographics in. I'm going to bring in a new data set. I don't know these people. And I'm new at what a marketing funnel is. I think all this information together and created a pattern. It was really, really exciting. I'm excited. Again, geeking out, Karen. We don't get invited to a lot of parties. So, Karen, do you want to add anything to this?
Well, I think that the principle here about the patterning and how you can then transfer this back to the job, right? They were able to do something with it, see it kind of magically happen in the session. And then they had access to this funnel. So it kind of came alive, was like this light bulb. And then they were like, oh, I can transfer that directly to the work that I do. And I think that that's what's so important when we're aligning the brain-based principles and what we're talking about through engagement, is we have to create these activities that that kind of give them an active role in their learning so that they want to be able to take the patterning back. We could have just taught them how to sort through and how to find the patterns, same brain-based principle, but the virtual learning is real learning aspect is how do we take it and then help them transfer it back on the job. So I'm going to share mine, which is a little bit dark, but I love this one because let's face it, hacking happens, right? So there was this company that we worked with that their goal was to explore how hackers think, because that was obviously a cyber safety organization. And they wanted to get people into the mindset of what a hacker actually thinks and emphasize the importance of monitoring personal accounts and, why we want to make sure that we're monitoring accounts, why we want to change our passwords all the time, because it drives me crazy. So this one is really near and dear to me because going through this activity, I was supporting this client, but going through this activity had a real emotional connection to me because I've always thought, like, why do I have to change it? Why do I have to change it? This activity really helped me to see why, because we actually were put into the challenge of being somebody who needed to kind of go through and steal the personal accounts. And they walked through the approach by completing some e-learning scenarios and challenges that identified the key strategies of successful hackers. What do they do? What are the pieces that they're looking for? And then they use that information to develop methods for safeguarding their own accounts. Of course, this audience was banking customers. And what they did then is they came back and they were able to share their findings. One way that, they will take this back to their own personal accounts and to apply that to reduce their personal risk of getting hacked in the future. So being able to walk in the shoes of what a hacker is going to be doing to buy personal accounts was eye-opening, right? And so it connected to me on such an emotional level throughout the design, because it wasn't just figuring out the patterns. It was, how does this directly tie to me, and how is that going to have an impact on me? So we'll go through the design really quickly, and then we'll get into you all being able to have a worksheet similar to this to be able to create your own. But obviously, they started with a conversation, who's been hacked before. I mean, I was amazed. Everyone except maybe 3 people in the room had been hacked. So that was startling, emotionally startling. I had not at the time. I have been since. But at the time I hadn't been. So it was startling to me to think that there was that many. So there was an emotional tie there. And then we spent about 5 minutes completing that e-learning. And then we went through, returned back to the virtual classroom. And again, after those e-learnings and some branching scenarios, we kind of came back and said what one thing we could do differently. So we all had some aha moments that we were then able to take back. But the key principle here is that emotions are critically tied to patterning. And when we think about that in relation to the Inquirer Engagement Framework, we're saying emotionally engaging learners in what they're doing matters. And this speaks volumes to that, because you can bet when I left this class, I was so emotionally tied. I went and changed everything. It was at that moment, it was probably about 10 years ago, I think I went through this with this client. I went back and really kind of understood the reasoning behind changing all my passwords and making sure that everything was secure, but not only understanding it, but actually doing it. And then I'll have each of my kids do it, my husband do it, my mother do it. So, I mean, I shared all of that, with other people. So that little nugget transferred into a lot of different areas of learning. So why do we share these with you? We share these examples with you so that you can start to go through this same process and make your learning sessions much more active, much more real, much more emotionally tied, so that you can ultimately get to that intellectual engagement that we mentioned. Now, the majority of this time that we spent together, we focused on active learning. And going through these couple of activities, you can see that through the design process, these activities will add some depth. They'll add some interactivity to your sessions. They'll keep people fully engaged throughout your virtual learning journey. But how do we keep it going, right? So the next step in our formula is, how do we move from active to truly sustainable? And one of the ways, just to give you this nugget, is to include that debrief. We talked about it a little bit in our outline, but including a debrief in your lesson will create that sustainable action. So go back to the hacker example. The debrief was that we all had to come back and say one thing, right, that we connected with, that we're going to be able to change. And my one thing was, oh my God, I need to go change all of my passwords. And so it was actionable. And so if you can create a debrief that takes the learning, the practice, and then allows that to bubble up, you're going to create a sticky situation where that individual is then going to transfer that learning back on the job. Now, that debrief can be a gallery walk. That debrief can be a share out, can be a quick toss, can be anything, can be a teach back. It doesn't matter what the debrief is. This is just a couple of examples. The key is that learning needs context to survive on its own. And that's why the debrief is so important. It's where the learners make those connections between their knowledge and their application and their real world. And I think that that's the piece that we tend to skip. We've gotten to the point where we're like, okay, we know we can't just stay at knowledge. We have to move them into application and practice, but it's more than that. In order for virtual learning, any learning to be real learning, we have to make sure that it transfers to the job that we're doing, right? Or whatever it is that we're learning about. How do we implement that into real life? So again, to make learning stick, we have to allow learners to, one, be active in their learning, and two, to apply that new knowledge and debrief it so that they can apply that back on the job. The learning can become real, actionable, and sustainable learning that goes far beyond the training if we really methodically think about how we design, how we deliver, and how we support these virtual learning sessions. So I'm curious, in the last couple of minutes here, I'd like to take just a moment or so to ask you all to think about, I shared the debrief as one way to make virtual learning sustainable. Let's see what you guys think. In the chat, go ahead and let us know, what are some other ways to make virtual training sustainable?
And I think Karen will just talk about them as they come up, right? Let's just do that as they come up. Because I don't want to keep people past their time, and I know you've got more resources to share.
Absolutely. But how else can we make training sustainable?
Well, while people are thinking, I'm going to add one idea, is that if we start teaching with info, we create a lot of tools and infographics and things like that we give out at the end. Just like in traditional training, we'd have a bibliography in alphabetical order that we give out at the end. But if we could find ways to teach people the actual content using the micro-learning and the e-learning and the videos that we expect them to use back on the job to reinforce the content, I think that would make it more sustainable. In other words, the slide deck becomes less useful, and the tools we're using to teach become tools they can use back on the job. And I think that gives an extra bonus of making us, making the training more of a partner in learning instead of somebody that's done once the LMS says the training is over.
Yeah, and I think just like seeing this, I know a lot of people are probably typing, but I think it's a tough one. How do we make it sustainable? And I think one of the things that you mentioned, Jennifer, with the micro-learning assets, I think that's huge. Articles, and point them directly to it in the moment, in the training, when it means something, have them download it right there in the moment versus you'll get this next week, or you'll get this at the end, or it's in your participant guide. Make sure that it's applicable right then and there, and it's available to them.
And so Jeff talks about applicability that gets to relevance. I think that gets back to adult learning. If people remember that you thought it was important, and maybe they'll remember, and you tell them why you thought it was important, then they can remember that. And Tracy's got a SharePoint page that's organized and updated day by day. So that's great. Tina, we've got more sessions coming up. We'll make sure you know about that. But on the job coaching, I'll try to like take these and put them into an email, like as a follow up, Karen. We can do that. That'd be a good idea. What are the big takeaways from our students? But you've got one more resource you want to share with them quickly before everybody leaves?
I do. So as promised at the very beginning, when Jennifer mentioned what we were going to discuss today, the last thing was that we were going to provide you with a worksheet. And so I want to really quickly, we're going to walk through this worksheet really quick, just to showcase what it is that you have. You're going to have this design worksheet that's going to allow you to actively tailor your next virtual class. You're going to walk through hands-on practice, intermediate application, concepts, all the pieces and parts that we walked through. This worksheet will help you outline. So if you can see, you've got the activity overview, what's the topic of your activity? What are the guiding questions? This could be what people are asking. It could be your objectives. And then it's going to walk you through the engagement strategies: environmental engagement, intellectual engagement, emotional engagement. And then on the next page, you're going to see how we kind of break it down. What's the goal of the activity? What's the challenge? What's the audience? What's the approach? So all those pieces that we walked you through. Now, keep in mind, the activities that we shared with you, plus 3 more, are fully outlined in your ebook. So then you have this worksheet to kind of go along with your next activity so that you can walk yourself through these key components. And the last piece is, how does it tie to the brain-based strategies? And so you can walk yourself through this checklist for every activity that you're putting together, or every key learning that's going to happen in your virtual classroom. And you can start to make those ties, brain-based ties, back to our research, and the engagement back to your activity. So we wanted to make sure that we gave you this worksheet so that as you move into designing more and more and delivering more and more virtual activities, that you're really getting not just to the active side of it, but also to the sustainable side of it. So as we walk out today, I just want to say, we started our discussion today with virtual learning is real learning, and how to make your sessions active and sustainable through brain-based science. We walked you through a couple of exercises. I want you to think about, walking away from today. I just really want to encourage each of you to think about, what is your next step in making your virtual classrooms real learning. As you reflect on that, I want you to think, maybe, do you need a deeper conversation? And one of the things that we like to do here at NSYNC is to provide those deeper conversations. So you'll see in the chat that Jenna's going to provide you with our demo page. If you're interested in sharing what we talked about today with your team, to kind of, maybe you're excited, maybe you're sitting at the edge of your seat and you want more, give them this demo link and I'd be more than happy to speak with them. But if you're also just really passionate and you want to go a little bit deeper, get on my calendar and we'll just have a great conversation about your virtual training. And I can help you identify any challenges that you might have and possible solutions that, maybe we can help you with, or maybe, you just have the solutions that, we outlined that you can go out and work internally. But I'd love to have a further conversation with each and every one of you if you're interested. So my calendar's in the chat. I'm going to turn it over to Jenna. Thank you, Jennifer, for all of your insight, and Jennifer, you for running the show behind the scenes as our producer. Jenna, you can go ahead and take us out and let them know what's in store for next month.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions today. We will be having another webinar next month, October 5th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You won't want to miss it. It's going to be with Karen Veith and Cindy Foster. So if you'd like to go ahead and sign up, let me drop that chat link for you as well. And of course, it is on our calendar and on our website, so feel free to look there as well. Don't forget to stay in touch with Karen Veith. You have her calendar link, and you have that demo link if you would like to have a demo meeting as well. If you have any questions, please do reach out. Thank you all for today.